My wife slid a manila envelope across the breakfast table like she was handing me a restaurant check. She'd timed it perfectly. Coffee still hot, Saturday morning, no place I needed to be. I picked up my mug first, took a long sip, and looked at the envelope without touching it. "I want a divorce, Daniel," she said. She was standing by the kitchen window, arms crossed, already dressed. She'd been awake before me, which should have told me something. My wife hadn't woken up before me in 11 years. I set down my mug, reached for the envelope, and pulled out the papers. Everything was already filled in. Neat, typed, organized. Our 19 years of marriage reduced to a document that took maybe 40 minutes to prepare. I could tell by the formatting it came from Morrison and Hale downtown. They charged more per hour than most people made in a day, but they were thorough. I read every page. All 14 of them. My wife stood by the window the entire time, watching me the way someone watches a building they're about to demolish, waiting for the structural failure. When I finished, I straightened the pages, set them back on the table, and looked up at her. "All right," I said. "I'll have my attorney review these by Wednesday." She blinked. That was it, just one blink. But I'd known her long enough to understand what it meant. She'd expected something else. Anger, maybe. Tears. Some version of me that would make this easier for her to justify. "That's all you have to say?" she asked. "What would you like me to say?" She opened her mouth, then closed it, picked up her car keys from the counter. "I'll stay at Patrice's for a few days," she said. "Give you some space to process." I nodded and poured myself another coffee. I listened to her heels on the hardwood floor, the front door closing behind her, and the sound of her car backing down the driveway. Then I sat at the breakfast table in a house that had been quietly emptying out for months, and I thought about how strange it is when the thing you've been dreading finally arrives and feels almost like relief. My name is Daniel Marsh. I'm 54 years old, and I've spent the last 27 years as a forensic accountant. What that means, practically speaking, is that I find money people try to hide. Insurance fraud, corporate embezzlement, financial misrepresentation in divorce proceedings. I've built a career out of the understanding that numbers don't lie even when people do. My wife knew what I did for a living. Had known it for nearly 2 decades, which is why what she tried to pull was either very bold or very careless. I'm still not sure which. Her name was Sandra. Is Sandra. Sandra. She sells residential real estate in Portland, and she's genuinely good at it. Excellent instincts for what people want. Even better instincts for making them feel like they found it themselves. She can walk into a room and immediately understand what story the buyer needs to hear. It's a skill I admired for years. At some point, I stopped being the person she practiced it on. The signs started appearing about 8 months before that Saturday morning. Not dramatic signs, nothing so obvious as lipstick on a collar or a second phone hidden in a gym bag. Just small statistical anomalies. The kind of thing most people would dismiss as coincidence, but that I'm professionally trained to notice. Her mileage was off. She drove a late model SUV, and I'd handled the car insurance since we bought it. I knew her average monthly mileage. I'd been tracking it for years as part of keeping up with the policy. Around January, the numbers started climbing. Not by a lot, maybe 40 or 50 miles a week that I couldn't account for. She was showing more properties, she told me when I mentioned it casually. Market was picking up. That might have been the end of it, except that 3 weeks later I noticed a charge on our joint credit card. A wine bar in the Pearl District called our door. $97 on a Tuesday evening. My wife had told me she was at a listing appointment that night. A listing appointment doesn't require a $97 bar tab. I didn't say anything. Forensic work teaches you patience above everything else. You don't move until you have the full picture, because a partial picture is just a story, and stories can be explained away. Full pictures are facts. Over the following months, I built the full picture. The Tuesday evening appointments became a pattern. Every 2 weeks, sometimes more frequently. Always the Pearl District or the South Waterfront, areas she had no active listings in. The charges were always cash when she remembered, card when she forgot, which was more often as the months went on. Comfortable people get sloppy. I'd seen it dozens of times in my professional work. The GPS confirmation came by accident. Sandra had asked me to update the navigation software on her car in February. It kept freezing, and she had client appointments she couldn't be late for. While I was cycling through the recent location history to clear the cache, I saw the same address repeated 8 times over the previous 6 weeks. A condo building in the South Park blocks. I wrote it down on a notepad, finished the update, and said nothing. The address belonged to a property development company, specifically to a man named Craig Pemberton, 39 years old, who had been one of my wife's clients 18 months earlier. He bought 2 properties through her firm. Based on the commission structure Sandra had explained to me at the time, those 2 sales alone were worth more than most people made in a year. Craig Pemberton was very good at spending money he'd inherited and moderately skilled at multiplying it through real estate. He had the kind of easy, expensive confidence that photographs well and reads as attractive, until you look closely enough to realize there's no particular substance underneath it. I found all of this through public records, professional databases I had legitimate access to, and the kind of careful, methodical research that is simply second nature to me at this point. I wasn't building a legal case. I had no intention of confronting anyone or hiring a private investigator. I was simply completing the picture, the way you complete any analysis. Not because you need all the pieces to know the answer, but because incomplete information leads to incomplete decisions. By March, I had enough. Here is what I didn't do. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I didn't call my wife at midnight demanding explanations or search her phone while she slept. I went to work every day, came home, had dinners that were quieter than they used to be, and made one appointment that I didn't mention to anyone. I called Robert Eames, the attorney I used for contract work, and asked him to review our prenuptial agreement. Sandra had actually insisted on the prenup when we got married. She'd had a difficult experience watching her parents divorce and wanted both of us protected. At the time, I thought it was practical and unsentimental in a way I appreciated. Looking at it again 20 years later, I realized it was even more thoroughly in my favor than I remembered. Robert confirmed it in about 45 minutes. Everything you came in with, you leave with, he said. Plus half of what you built together, which, based on what you described, is a very reasonable split. So when my wife handed me those papers on a Saturday morning and I read every page and said I'd have my attorney review them by Wednesday, I already knew what the review would find. I wasn't being calm because I'd transcended the situation. I was being calm because I'd done my homework. The Wednesday conversation with Robert took 20 minutes. He made 3 small requests for minor clarifications, and that was it. I signed my copies on Thursday and had them filed before my wife had finished whatever reinvention she was conducting at Patrice's house. Patrice called me on Friday evening. I should explain about Patrice. She and Sandra had been close since before I met either of them. Sorority sisters, the kind of friendship built on shared history rather than actual compatibility. Patrice was a therapist who had never particularly liked me, not openly hostile, but the kind of politely cordial that means you've been discussed in less than flattering terms. I was surprised when her name came up on my phone. "Daniel," she said. "I hope this isn't a terrible time." "It's fine," I said. "What's up?" There was a pause, and then, "I need you to know that I think what's happening is wrong. What Sandra is doing. And I just can't sit here and not say something." I sat down. "I appreciate that, Patrice. She's been staying here for a week, and she's not grieving, Daniel. She's celebrating. She went out both nights with Craig, and she came back talking about the future like you, and everything you built together was just a chapter that's finished now." Another pause. "I have a daughter your daughter's age. I kept thinking about how I'd want someone to tell her." My daughter. Megan was 26, living in Chicago, working as a charge nurse at Northwestern. Sandra and I had been her parents together for her whole life. Whatever was happening between me and my wife, Megan occupied a completely separate category in my thinking. "Has Sandra called Megan?" I asked. "Sandra called Megan?" I asked. "She said she would this week." I thanked Patrice and meant it. We talked for another few minutes about logistics. Nothing personal, just practical questions she had about Sandra's mail and a prescription she'd left at the house. Before she hung up, she said, "For whatever it's worth, you always seemed like one of the decent ones." I told her that was very kind. After I got off the phone, I sat in my home office for a while. The house was very quiet. Sandra had taken her most immediately necessary things when she left: clothes, toiletries, her laptop. But everything else was still here. Her reading glasses on the nightstand, her garden catalog stacked by the back door, the photograph of us at the coast from our 10th anniversary, the one she'd specifically framed herself and put on the mantel because she said it was the best picture ever taken of her. I thought about all of it for a long time. Not with anger exactly, more the way you feel when you finish a very long project and realize it's done, and all you can do now is determine what comes next. I called my daughter the next morning. Megan answered on the second ring, which meant she wasn't working. "Dad," she said, and I could hear from her voice that she already knew. "Mom called last night." What did she tell you? That you two had grown apart and she felt like she needed to find herself. A pause. And then when I asked questions, she started crying and the call got weird and I've been trying to figure out how to call you ever since. I told her the broad strokes. Not everything, not with every particular, but enough. My daughter is not someone who responds well to being handled carefully. She works emergency medicine. She wants the information and she wants it straight. When I finished, there was a silence. Then, you've known for months. Since approximately January, yes. And you just handled it quietly. That seemed like the better approach. God, Dad. She laughed, which surprised me, though it shouldn't have. Megan's laughter has always arrived in unexpected places. Okay, I'm coming to Portland. You don't have to do that. I have 9 days off starting Thursday, and apparently I'm not using them to have a normal visit with both my parents anymore. So I'm coming to Portland. Have food in your house when I get there. She arrived on a Thursday afternoon while I was finishing a quarterly report for a client. I heard the cab pull up, heard the door, heard her rolling her suitcase across the entryway, and then she was in my office doorway, still in her travel clothes, looking at me the way my daughter has always looked at me. Slightly skeptical, entirely present. You look exactly the same, she said. You expected otherwise? I don't know what I expected. She set her bag down and came around the desk and hugged me, longer than her usual quick embrace. I'm glad you're okay. I told her I was okay. We ordered Thai food and sat at my dining room table and talked for hours, the way we hadn't since before her residency swallowed her entire life. She talked about the hospital, about a colleague she was cautiously interested in, about a patient case she couldn't stop thinking about. I talked about my work, about the house, about plans I'd started making for the months ahead. At some point she said, "Tell me about how you met Mom. I want to hear your version." So I told her. We met at a professional event. Sandra was new to real estate. I was doing contract work for a firm downtown. She walked up to me at the drinks table and introduced herself because, she later told me, I was the only person in the room who looked like I was genuinely enjoying my own company, rather than performing enjoyment for an audience. We dated for 2 years before we got married. Had a good run of it for a long time, and then somewhere in the middle distance, we became more like efficient roommates than partners. And neither of us said enough about it for long enough that it calcified into something harder to fix. She should have told you she was unhappy, Megan said. Probably. There's no probably about it. People don't always know how to say the hard thing directly, I said. They find other exits. My daughter looked at me across the table with that expression she gets when she's deciding whether I'm being genuinely thoughtful or making excuses. You're being very generous to her. I'm not interested in being otherwise. She'll live with what she did. I don't need to be involved in that accounting. Megan was quiet for a moment. I want to be like you when I'm 54, she said. You're already better at this than I am, I said, which was true. She stayed for 9 days. We cooked breakfast together and went for morning runs and watched old movies I'd seen as a kid and she hadn't. I slept better those 9 days than I had in months. The house felt different with another person in it. Not the tense, charged silence of the previous year, but something quieter and easier. On her 5th day, my phone rang with an unknown Portland number. I answered in the kitchen while Megan was reading in the living room. Daniel, Sandra's voice. Sandra, I hear Megan is visiting. She is. A silence stretched between us. I'd like to see her, my wife said. If that's possible. You can call her directly. She's an adult. I know that. I wanted to make sure you weren't. She stopped herself. I wanted to make sure it was all right. She's my daughter and your daughter. The two situations are not connected. My wife was quiet. When she spoke again, her voice had dropped slightly. How are you doing, Daniel? Honestly, I'm doing well. You sound. She paused. You sound the same as always. What did you expect me to sound like? She didn't answer that directly. Instead, she said, I've been thinking about you. About everything. About weather, Sandra, I said, keeping my voice even. I don't think either of us benefits from going in that direction. I just need you to know I didn't do this to hurt you. I believe you, I said, and I meant it. The things people do to feel something again are rarely about hurting someone else. They're just inadvertently very good at it. Another pause. That's a very Daniel answer. I've had a lot of time to think about it. She called Megan later that afternoon. My daughter took the call in the guest room, and I didn't ask about it afterward. It wasn't my conversation. The news about Craig Pemberton came from an unlikely source. I was at a closing meeting for a client 2 weeks after Megan went back to Chicago. Routine work, reviewing documents. When one of the other attorneys mentioned his name in passing while discussing a separate matter, Craig Pemberton had dissolved his development partnership earlier that month under circumstances that were being reviewed by the Oregon Real Estate Agency. His business partner had discovered that a significant portion of their operating capital had been redirected through personal accounts. The review was civil, not criminal, at least for the moment, but the inquiry was thorough. I noted this the way I note most information of professional interest, without much emotional reaction, because it was not my problem to solve and not my damage to assess. Craig Pemberton's financial recklessness was consistent with everything I'd understood about him from a distance. People who spend inherited money with easy confidence often lack the rigor required to protect earned money. That was his problem to manage. Megan called me that weekend. She'd heard through her mother, who had apparently called her in some distress. "She sounds really bad, Dad," Megan said. She wasn't asking me to do anything about it. She was my daughter reporting information she thought I should have. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said. "Are you actually?" "Yes," I said. "I don't enjoy knowing she's struggling, Megan. I'm just not the right person to help her with it." "I know." She was quiet for a second. "She asked if you talked to her. She has my number. She's scared you won't pick up." "She has my number. She's scared you won't pick up." I thought about this for a moment. "I'll pick up," I said. Sandra called the following Thursday evening. I was in my office finishing a report, and her name on the screen had a different weight to it now than it used to. Not painful exactly, just significant. The way old photographs feel. Something that belongs to a specific chapter. "I heard about Craig," I said when I answered. "Yes." Her voice was tired. The performance was gone. She didn't have the energy for it, or maybe she'd decided it wasn't serving her anymore. "Daniel, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." "All right, did you know? Before I gave you the papers, did you know about everything?" "I did." She didn't say anything for several seconds. "How long?" "About 8 months. And you just let it happen. You'd made your choices," I said. "I wasn't going to make them for you." "That's not normal," she said. "Most people would have. I know what most people would have done. I'm not most people." She laughed then, short and exhausted. The laugh of someone who has run out of ways to be surprised. "No, you really aren't. Are you safe?" I asked. "Do you have what you need?" "Patrice has been good. And I have the house, assuming you're not." "The house is yours," I said. "We agreed on that in the filing." "I know, I just wanted to." She stopped. She stopped. Started Shen. "I think I've been very stupid, Daniel." "You made some choices that didn't work out the way you planned," I said. "That's not exactly the same thing. Do you think we could ever—" "No," I said quietly. "Not harsh, just complete. I don't think we could, and I think somewhere you know that too." She was quiet for a long time. "I hope you're happy," she said finally. "I mean that. You deserved more than I gave you." "So did you," I said. "Go find it." After we hung up, I sat in my home office for a while. The room was exactly as I'd arranged it 3 months ago. 3 monitors, efficient filing, no decorative furniture that served no function. Through the east-facing window, the first light of evening was settling over the city, turning the rooftop something between gold and gray. I had a new client starting Monday, a small family-owned business in Beaverton that suspected an internal bookkeeping problem. Methodical work. The kind I was good at. Megan was planning to visit again in November, this time for Thanksgiving, and she'd mentioned maybe bringing her colleague, though she'd stated it so carefully that I pretended not to notice. I thought about how quickly a life can be disassembled, and how quickly, if you pay attention, it can be rebuilt into something cleaner and more honest. I thought about the way relief and grief can occupy the same moment without canceling each other out. I thought about my daughter's laughter arriving in unexpected places. I thought about 19 years of mostly good and partially broken, and how unfair it would be to either remember only one of those things. Then I turned back to my report because my client in Beaverton was depending on me, and the numbers were waiting, and the numbers, as I had always known, do not lie. I finished the report by 9, made dinner from what I had in the kitchen, sat at the counter the way I preferred to sit now, without any sense that this was temporary or insufficient, just a man in his own home, at his own pace, with a particular quiet that isn't emptiness but something closer to the word enough. My phone buzzed once. "Megan, don't forget to actually sleep tonight. Doctor's orders." I sent back a thumbs up, which she hated, which was exactly why I did it. Then I closed my laptop, turned off the kitchen lights, and walked down the hallway of a house that finally felt like mine again.